What begins as a routine promotional conversation about the book and life in the US slowly turns into a psychological confrontation, first subtle jabs, then a feeling of betrayal when the producers play an unexpected clip, and finally an explosion. Harry interrupts the interview, but before leaving, he takes over the broadcast and addresses the audience directly. In the end, it turns out that the world officially saw only a few seconds of the scandal, but the real version, the one you just heard, leaked online and shows everyone involved in a completely different light. Harry, Anderson says, with that calm, familiar half smile. Thank you for being here. Harry's jaw flexes once before he answers. Well, he says, you lot weren't going to stop asking, were you? It sounds like a joke. Almost. The crew can't tell if they should chuckle, so they don't. Let's start simple, Anderson continues. How is life here? California, the new home, the new chapter. Harry exhales through his nose, eyes drifting somewhere over Anderson's shoulder. Life is quieter, he says. At least when cameras like yours aren't around. A small smile from Anderson. Quieter sounds like a luxury. For people who grew up with privacy, Harry replies, it's normal. For me, it's novelty. The first minutes glide by almost smoothly. They talk about the sun, the ocean, the kids learning American accents. Harry mentions school runs, a rescue dog who hates leaf blowers, the absurdity of a prince taking out the trash in sweatpants. There's laughter, even from the crew. It almost feels safe. But every safe question has a shadow underneath it, and eventually Anderson steps into the shade. You write a lot, Anderson says, glancing at his notes, about being the spare. About growing up as a symbol rather than a son. Do you feel like you've finally escaped that role? Harry's smile tightens. His fingers tap once against the arm of the chair. Escaped, he repeats. It's not a prison you walk out of. It's more like a tattoo. You can leave the palace, leave the country, change your name if you want. The ink is still there. And yet, Anderson presses gently, you've built a new life. New work, new causes. Isn't that a kind of freedom? Freedom with a forwarding address, Harry says. The mail still finds me. The room feels a little colder. The crew shifts their weight from one foot to the other. Someone coughs and immediately regrets it. Anderson lets a beat of silence stretch. He's good at that, using quiet like a scalpel. You've spoken about control, he says. About taking back your story. But the critics, he doesn't look up when he says the word, argue that for someone who wants distance from the monarchy, you talk about it, a lot. Books, documentaries, interviews like this one. How do you reconcile that? Harry's eyes harden. I grew up in a house where my grief belonged to other people, he says. My mistakes, my pain, my relationships, they all became public property. So if I decide to stand up and say, this is what actually happened, that's not obsession. That's self-defense. And the profit? Anderson asks quietly. The book deals. The streaming contracts. Do they complicate that defense at all? There it is. Harry leans forward, elbows on knees, voice dropping half an octave. Is it profit, he says, when you're finally paid for the story everyone stole from you for free? Anderson meets his gaze. Some would say you're being paid for keeping that story alive. A soft crackle in Harry's jaw. He sits back again, crossing his arms now, a barrier laid across his chest. Some would say a lot of things, he replies. That's why people like you have jobs. The crew feels the shift. It's small, like a hairline fracture, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. Anderson doesn't react. Not outwardly. Let me do something here, he says instead, turning slightly toward camera one. We've prepared a short clip. Harry's head snaps toward him. Clip? One of your own, Anderson assures him. Your audiobook. Just a passage. You cleared usage with our team. There had been so many emails. Lawyers, agents, publicists. It's believable that he missed a line. Still, his expression goes wary. A producer in the control room gives the nod. On the studio monitor, silent for the crew, loud in Harry's earpiece, his own voice comes through. I was tired of being handled, the recorded Harry says. Tired of journalists pretending they were different when all they wanted was blood on camera. The playback stops on that word, blood. Present Harry's face is unreadable for 3 long seconds. Anderson watches him. You said that, he notes gently. About interviews. About people like me. And yet you're here. Why? Harry's laugh is sharp, humorless. Did they tell you when they'd spring that on me? He asks. He's not talking to Anderson alone anymore, he's talking to the ceiling, to the unseen faces behind glass. Harry, you signed. Sure, Harry cuts in. Somewhere on page 11, there was a line, we reserve the right to ambush you on your own words. The crew glances instinctively toward the control room. Through the glass, the senior producer is expressionless, lips pressed thin. This is good television, her eyes say. Stay with it. Anderson's voice drops, steady. This isn't an ambush. It's context. You've built a public identity around rejecting the press, yet you sit with us. That contradiction is interesting. Harry reaches into his jacket pocket. For a split second, a security guard off to the side tenses, then relaxes when he sees it's just a small black device. A recorder. He clicks it on and sets it gently on the table between them. What are you doing? Anderson asks. Control, Harry says. You hit play. I hit record. Now we're both honest about what this really is. Anderson's mouth moves, just slightly. It could be a twitch, could be the ghost of a smile. Hard to tell. All right, he says. Let's go there. The stakes climb without anyone announcing it. They talk about Meghan. About the move. About the nights when the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Harry's voice is sharper now, less curated. He throws small jabs at tabloids, at courtiers, at men in suits who never had to walk behind a coffin on live television. Anderson listens, nods, keeps his tone measured. Then he makes the mistake that was scripted to look innocent. You've said Meghan saved you, he begins. Those are your words. Do you worry that putting that much weight on one person, on one relationship, creates its own kind of cage? Harry's lips curve, not in amusement. Is that your question? He asks. Or did someone from upstairs hand you that one? Upstairs here means the control room. It also means the network, the shareholders, the vague mass of people who have never stepped inside this studio but still decide who gets a primetime slot. Anderson hesitates, just long enough for the hesitation to become its own answer. My job, he says, is to ask what people at home are asking. And what are they asking? Harry fires back. If my wife is too loud? Too American? Too brown for the family business? The word hangs, deliberate and heavy. No one moves. You brought race into this, Anderson replies quietly, long before I did. In interviews. In your own book. Because it was there, Harry says. Because pretending otherwise would be a lie. Is that what you want? A nicer version of the truth for Sunday night television? Anderson draws in a breath. I want your truth, he says. But I also want to know if you're willing to examine yourself with the same intensity. And there it is again, the word he keeps circling like a drain. Accountability. He leans in, voice soft but unyielding. You talk about being hunted by cameras. About being devoured by headlines. Yet you've built an empire on telling your side. On selling your side. Do you ever worry that you become the thing you say you hate? For a heartbeat, Harry doesn't answer. Then he smiles. Not the warm, careful smile that makes it into official portraits. This one is smaller. Sharper. Tired. Do you ever worry, he asks, that you've confused empathy with extraction? Anderson blinks. What do you mean? You interview people at their lowest points, Harry says. You walk into burned-out villages, bombed cities, cancer wards. You look them in the eyes and ask, how does it feel? And then you go home. You edit. You broadcast. You move on. Tell me, Anderson, at what point does witnessing become feeding? The question catches Anderson off guard. Not because he hasn't thought about it, but because no one is supposed to ask it on his own show. This isn't about me, he says slowly. It's always about you, Harry replies. You just hide it better. The control room is buzzing now. Stay with it, the producer says into her headset. He's on a roll. We're getting gold. Anderson hears none of that. He hears his own pulse in his ears. He tries to pivot. Let's talk about your mother. The whole energy of the room contracts. Harry's shoulders go rigid, just for a moment. It's almost imperceptible, except the boom operator notices because he's been watching the prince's breathing patterns for the past 52 minutes. You said she'd understand your choices, Anderson continues gently. Leaving. Speaking out. Do you still believe that? Harry's eyes flick down to the recorder on the table, then up to the camera lens just past Anderson's shoulder. I believe she knew what it was like, he says. To bleed for an institution that never learned how to say sorry. And if she were watching this now? Anderson asks, voice almost a whisper. Watching you. Would she be proud? In the control room, the producer smiles. This was the line. The button. The moment the audience was supposed to feel something like closure. In the studio, Harry's hands curl into fists on his knees. Don't do that, he says softly. Do what? Anderson asks. Use my mother as a mirror you can hold up to me, Harry replies. You didn't know her. You knew her image. So did the millions who watched her die slowly on front pages? If you want to talk about pride, talk about yours. Not hers. The edge in his voice slices clean through the air. Anderson feels something hot and old rising in his chest. Irritation. Maybe anger. Maybe the accumulated weight of every guest who ever sat in that chair and decided that the role of the interviewer was to absorb their punches without flinching. You're right, he says, the steel finally audible. I didn't know her. But I know what dignity looks like. I've seen it in people who had nothing. Who lost everything. And they didn't sneer their way through it. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. The calm makes it worse. What I see here, Anderson continues, is a man who keeps setting fires and then crying about the smoke. That's the moment. Later, when the network lawyers argue over liability and tone and brand safety, they will circle this sentence in red. This is where sympathy shifts. This is where the prince stops looking wounded and starts looking dangerous. Harry stands up. The chair tilts, then slams back into place with a loud metallic clack. The sound ricochets around the studio. We're done, he says. Harry, Anderson starts. We are done, Harry repeats, ripping the mic pack from his waistband. The tiny clip on his collar snaps, leaving a dot of white on his dark shirt. You wanted blood? Congratulations. You got another corpse to parade for ratings. He turns as if to leave, then stops. The recorder on the table blinks its small red light, still running. Slowly, deliberately, Harry steps around Anderson's chair and walks toward camera 1. The operator freezes, unsure if he should tilt, pull focus is cut. Training says stay on the subject. Instinct screams the same. Harry stops an arm's length from the lens. You, he says, and he's not talking to Anderson anymore. He's talking to the person who will one day click this video out of boredom, out of habit, out of hunger. You sit on your sofa and call this just television, he says. You tell yourself you're different from the photographers who chased my mother down that tunnel. But it's the same appetite, isn't it? Pain as entertainment. Human beings as episodes. His voice doesn't crack. It doesn't rise. That's what makes it unsettling. You wanted to watch me explain myself, he continues. To prove I deserve your forgiveness, your sympathy. Your outrage. I'm not giving you that. Believe whatever headline makes you feel better. Villain, hero, traitor, victim. They're all just costumes for people you don't have to actually know. He leans closer, his reflection swallowing the frame. But remember this, he says. Every time you press play, you're not just watching. You're participating. In the feeding. A hand hovers near the switch in the control room. Do we cut? A junior tech whispers. No, the producer breathes. Let him hang himself. Harry glances down at the recorder, then back into the camera. I'm done letting other people own my story, he says. Even this version. Especially this version. And then he does something no one in the studio expected. He reaches forward and covers the lens with his palm. The screen goes black for a moment, but the audio keeps going. Footsteps, a door, voices overlapping, Anderson calling his name, a producer saying, "We can fix this in post," someone else muttering, "Jesus Christ." Then a sharp click. The recorder on the table is turned off. What aired that Sunday night was 10 minutes long. A polished edit. A few clipped answers. A brief flare of temper. The final shot, Harry rising abruptly, the words "this interview is over" cutting to black. A scandal, neatly packaged. Enough to trend, not enough to threaten shareholders. What you just heard is not that version. This is the file that never made it to broadcast. The one a tired editor saved to a private folder labeled simply take_3_raw_final. The one someone, months later, copied onto a thumb drive and slipped into an envelope with no return address. You've listened to the whole thing now. The warmth, the cracks, the ambush, the counterattack, the moment a man who spent his life in front of cameras tried, for a few seconds, to seize one for himself. When the audio ends, the silence that follows is your responsibility. Because maybe the real scandal isn't that a prince walked out on Anderson Cooper. Maybe it's that you pressed play, knowing exactly what you were hoping to find.